afternoon, everyone. The sun is shining. I didn't have to shovel my driveway to get up to the road today, and I found a parking space. So, it's a good afternoon. Welcome to the League of Women Voters Meet Your Legislator event. It's an annual event that local leagues throughout Connecticut have with their legislators, where we are asking questions of the legislators that are important issues for the league. And we also invite you constituents to the conversation so that you can ask questions that are important to you. I will start out asking some of the league questions on league issues and then invite you to join in for your brief on question for the legislators. This is 2018. It's an even year. That means the General Assembly is meeting in a short session from February to May. It says under the Connecticut General Assembly information that during a short session, the state constitution and legislative rules limit the introduction of proposed bills to budgetary, revenue, and financial matters. It's only too bad that the issues aren't short as well. There certainly are a large number of issues before our Connecticut General Assembly, and today our legislators, Senator Toni Boucher and Representatives Michael Ferguson and John Frey, are here to discuss some of those issues with us. So I welcome you, and if you could just begin giving your committee assignments and then each up to 5 minutes with your real quick overview of the legislative session. And then I'll begin with questions.
I'll start.
Okay?
We'll just go down the road.
Okay.
I won't pull rank.
First of all, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. It's important to hear the feedback, what people are thinking in Ridgefield. So my district was until Mike stole part of it, but it was all of Ridgefield. James, exactly right. So Michael represents from George Washington Highway across Canterbury Lane north. But if you live on the south side of that street, you're still mine. But I don't check where you live when you call me, so you can still call me. People do. As Linda mentioned, this is a short session. So the session after the election in an odd year is January till June. This year it's February to May. Because technically we have a 2-year budget, although it's out of whack. The intention was to make it a budget adjustment year, although frankly every bill is still fair game. You've seen legalizing marijuana, in the institution of tolls, all kinds of things. Casinos, yeah, this is a hotbed issue again. It really has nothing to do with the state budget, indirectly maybe perhaps. But I want to thank the league. So I've been doing this a long time. When we first started, this was a very small group. It wasn't really open to the public. I don't think it was, but we had 4 or 5 people in a basement room in a small conference room in town hall, went over the league issues, and that was it. It was half an hour. It was very cordial. Then we went big time and went to the Lodowicz house. I didn't even see the Lodowicz here today. But they had a brunch. We did it 3 or 4 years, and that was really, really nice. And then we've come to this forum, which is different, but equally as nice. So thank you. And I do want to recognize, last year we had over 100 people here. Today, there are gun marches in Washington, Hartford, a bunch of Stanford, a bunch of other cities. I can tell you that my sister and my niece are at the one in Washington. They got a bus at 3:30 this morning. And some of you know I've talked about it before, but I had 2 nieces, twins, who were in 4th grade at Sandy Hook Elementary School, and a nephew was in 1st grade. And I can tell you that I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but our lives have changed, and I'm just the uncle, but one of my nieces has PTSD. All I can say is that my sister went off early this morning with my encouragement, and for those that went today, thank you for doing that, because I think after what happened in Florida a couple weeks ago, we will see some changes, and where the kids at Sandy Hook were just too young to be able to vocalize those. As Linda mentioned, that this year being the short session, we're only able to introduce bills that have a fiscal impact. I can give you a couple that I introduced. One was to prohibit elected officials from pensions and health benefits. As legislators, we're part-time. Our income is $28,000 a year, base salary. I don't think that a state legislature should be eligible for a pension or health benefits. If you look at our members of our Washington delegation, Senators Blumenthal, Murphy, John Larson, I guess those three at least, they forego the federal health benefits and take the state benefits as a retired state employee. What does that tell you? That ours are way richer and more, better than the ones that are offered to members of city members of Congress. So I put in a bill to eliminate the 2.5% cap that municipalities have on our budgets. It's been an issue with the school budget. I personally don't have a problem with 2.5%, but I think I think one thing that's laughable that the state is determining what the town's cap should be when the state is in such disarray. Number one. Number two, in towns like Ridgefield, who have a town meeting form of government and referendum, if we choose to do 2.75 or 3%, we should be able to by voting on it. Likewise, if we choose to do 1%, we should be able to do that. And I think if the state's saying that you can't go over 2.5, we will never see a budget less than 2.5, no matter what the situation is. So I've done that. I was talking to Tammy before. We both put in legislation yesterday, a testimony on the bump stop bill, which I think Congress is going to address that. I'm hopeful they are. But that's taking a semi-automatic and making it an automatic, which was banned some years ago, and it's like shooting shrapnel. I was a guest at Upper Worcester Mountain, and someone had a bump stop, and I shot one, and I'm not proficient in that. But the way they explained to me, and these are legal gun owners, that these just, the legal gun owners aren't for these things. These are bad guys like the guy in Las Vegas. So anyways, I look forward to chatting. So let me just, one last thing. We're kind of mid-session. So the session started February 9th and ends May 9th. Committees are wrapping up. Until something goes through the committee, either the House or the Senate or both can't really act. So we haven't really been in full session in a while. That's going to start probably in 3 weeks. There's concerns about the governor's budget, what he's been cutting. We talked about cutting MSP, the aid to primarily seniors and some disabled. We're okay now through June 30th. He's called cutting that again. In my 20 years, I have never seen a governor, Republican or Democrat, I've never seen a governor's budget passed as it was proposed. So it will be tweaked, it will be refined. Hopefully what comes out in the end will be better. Last year, it wasn't until October, but we did pass a bipartisan budget. It wasn't perfect. Bipartisan means compromise. We all did that. But it was better than what it could have been. So I'll kind of leave it at that and look forward to your questions, Toni.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see all of you here in wonderful Ridgefield. It's still wonderful Ridgefield, even with the terrible financial problems that the state has. The state is no question in fiscal crisis. I just had, an experience that all of us have had too many times in the last few years. And my best friend from college, her husband, and she live in Woodbridge. He's a doctor at Yale New Haven, have given up on Connecticut. And she called me last night to say that they were leaving for Florida. He took early retirement because of the financial state of Connecticut and the cost. Imagine him, a doctor. And I even talked to a young hotel operator from Boston not long ago who said he's from Connecticut, from Waterbury. He had to leave because of a $1,000 cost tax on his car when it was only $200 cost in Massachusetts, and he didn't want to leave Waterbury or his mom. And $1,000 actually of cost, but it would be permanent every year, forced him to leave Connecticut. And that story's repeated too many times, and is the real difficulty and challenge that we have, those of us that love our state, love our homes, and have been working really hard for just a little bit of compensation to be your voice, to be your advocate. And I don't care what side of the political aisle, because I know that hotel operator was not necessarily on my side of the political aisle, and he didn't know who I was that he was talking to either. This is what we're fighting for right now, and what is the overriding issue in this session. It's the fact that here we are, 7 or 8 years later, still facing session after session of a deficit. And I think it's up to 170 or 80 right now, 181. even, out of date as the materials that you have in front of you. And so this is really the thing that we're grappling with the most. How Connecticut has gotten to this point of being so unaffordable for the people who want to keep, in particular our seniors in our towns. And how do we help to move the state out of this debacle? There's no question that a governor and a president could offer up a budget, offer up a bill, offer up a gun bill, but who decides? State representatives, state senators, congressmen, and U.S. senators. They make the final decision. And how those decisions have been made in the past have been governed by one particular side of the aisle, but now, just in the last year, there's a tie in the Senate, and it's getting closer in the House, and some things just don't pass quite like they did on straight party line, which is a good thing, I think, for everyone. It forces people to actually sit down and talk about them, particularly the budget and taxes. In the past, it was just, forget about it. The door is shut, you don't have a place to play, you can't be a voice for your citizens. That has changed, I think, for the better. So there is hope at the end of the tunnel, as I feel. I think there is a change coming up. Just so you know, I'm your state senator, Toni Boucher, since 2009. I serve on the Transportation Committee now as the chair. I used to be a ranking member because we have a tie, and now as a co-chair on education. And by the way, the bill that I sponsored in transportation was a bill to put the decision of reducing our rail service and the decision on raising our rail commuter rates into the legislature instead of the DOT as they do now, because they don't hear us, they don't listen, they just raise it without thinking about it. And in education, I have a bill that is sailing through for the first time after trying for 10 years on Holocaust education in our social studies classes. It's not really a mandate, it's forcing them to have to cover that piece of curriculum. And luckily, for the first time in 10 years, now we have bipartisan support on this. And I've sort of taken the lead on it simply because my Jewish friends in the legislature have been reluctant to do so because they get criticized so roundly. So I was happy to do this, and I'm happy that it's finally getting to a point where we have great bipartisan support, because our school children need to know about this chapter in history, or they do things that are thoughtless and inappropriate that hurt people in our schools and in our communities. So I feel strongly about that.
It's another expense for everyone in our state. And at a particular time now where it is so expensive to live here, so many people are leaving Connecticut, policies like that are not going to do anything to, one, encourage people to stay here, and two, encourage people to want to come and actually live in Connecticut. And I'm sure we'll discuss that more, but just at a forum I had a few weeks ago in Danbury, we had someone there who came up to us, and I wrote it down here. They said, stop coming to us to fund the mess that we're in, because you've already come to us to fund this mess, and it hasn't been working, which means that we do have to start to change business as usual in many respects. The status quo is not working. We have to change our approach on how we're tackling our budget crisis and fiscal crisis within the state of Connecticut. And I think you saw that coming true to a degree last fall in the bipartisan budget that was passed in the legislature. Republicans and Democrats worked together on a compromised agreement that had the overwhelming support of the legislature. And although not perfect, there were aspects of that were certainly good things for Connecticut and for the people of Connecticut. And I would argue that that's where we need to continue to work off of, build off of, as we move forward in terms of making sure that Connecticut has brighter days and that we take a step forward rather than a step back. As Representative Frey and Senator Boucher said, this is a budget adjustment session, so it is a short session. We end, I believe it is the first Wednesday of, or it might be second Wednesday of May. So we really have only about a month and a half left in terms of session. The way the process works is the beginning of session, so we went in the first week of February. The first month and a half or so is committee work, and we hear all the bills start in committee, so they get public hearings, and we debate them, and then we either vote to pass them out of committee in order to continue the process. And that's basically what we're finishing up right now. So just this week, the Education and Transportation Committees that I serve on had their meetings to vote on bills in order to continue the process forward. And we have some other committees that are finishing up next week. And then our budget committees, the Finance Committee and Appropriations Committee's deadlines are not until the first week of April. They're always last in the process. Oftentimes because bills that other committees pass get referred to them because they have some type of fiscal to them. So with that, I just want to thank the League for putting this on. It was great last year, and I was anxious to be back here this year. And I want to thank all of you who took the time to be here today. I know it's a historic day, and I truly appreciate you coming out. And I also appreciate you being here because the Yukon women are playing this afternoon while we're here. So I don't know if if we're allowed to do this, but perhaps when it's halftime in about an hour, if someone who wants to go on their phone and check the score and announce that, I certainly would not. But no, seriously, thank you very much, and thank you to the League, and happy to be here.
You're welcome to all of our legislators. I want to continue with the first question in the fiscal crisis and budget vein. It's sort of a three-part question. How do you believe that Connecticut arrived at this fiscal crisis, and what data do you have to back up your beliefs? How will you use this data to find solutions to our financial problems? What steps during this short session can the legislature take to move away from blaming about past budgeting failures and move toward longer-term solutions for the major fiscal challenges ahead, and wrap tolls and taxes into that whole budget crisis? In the next happy 30 seconds.
30 seconds? Oh, yeah. Let's see.
To start with, is it possible maybe we can, with all deference to you, can we maybe talk totals separate and do all the rest together?
Okay.
I think that goes it.
Well,
So,
two-part question then.
yeah, so, but let me just back up. So in some states you see, and in some countries, you see, members of different parties throwing chairs at each other and things are really chaotic. That's not the case in Connecticut. We are really a very collegial group. We have sharp differences on certain issues for sure. And it tends to be more suburban versus urban, and not Republican, Democrat, really for the most part. I can speak to, having been in the House Republican caucus for 20 years, we have never taken a position that the House Republicans will vote. We've never taken a House caucus position. We never said, okay, we're going to vote X on the state budget or judicial nominee or you name it. We have never done it. Our job, we recognize that our legislators' job is to vote their district. So let me go back to your question. I fought where we are today with Governor John Rowland, who enacted this CBAC agreement with the State Employee Union for 20 years that gave them all kinds of crazy things. If you're a state employee, I was talking to a teacher earlier, and this is separate than a teacher. If you're a state employee, so if you're a ranking file Ridgefield Police Department lieutenant, and say you make $90,000 a year, your pension is based on $90,000 a year. It doesn't matter if in your last year, because of overtime, you made $130,000. Good for you. You served more hours and you earned extra money. But your pension is based on your stated income. Right? If you're a state employee, your pension is based on your highest 3 years of earned income. What's earned income? If you're a state police lieutenant and you make $90,000 a year, and in your last 3 years you made $130,000, $140,000 a year, and you get $8 a day for meals, and you get $130 a week for laundry for your uniform, and you get $200 a week for gasoline for your car or whatever, all that's factored into your pension. So all this stuff that has nothing to do with your earnings go into your pension. And for the second year in a row, I've actually submitted bills that have said pensions will be based on, going forward, because we have an agreement now, we're based on stated income, not earned income, because there's a big difference. When Governor Malloy ran for governor almost 8 years ago, he condemned John Rowland's CBAC agreement only to extend it, and this past year we saw he extended it another 5 years. So he not only extended it into the next governor's term, but a small part into the next, the 2 terms from now. So unfortunately, somehow, we have to go back to the state employees and have them come to the table in a more meaningful way than they have done the last 2 times. At one time, Governor White said, well, we had a gap in the budget. He said, okay, we're going to have to come up with a $200 million employee suggestion box where employees can make suggestions and will change the way state government does business. And obviously, no surprise to anybody, that generated nothing. So we have a huge problem with unfunded liabilities going forward. And the biggest part is unfunded pensions. And again, I separate teachers out because I think we have a covenant to them and all that other crazy stuff. The teachers don't get paid for overtime. And if they coach the debate team or football, that doesn't count towards the pension, all that kind of stuff. But, and I don't think, I think the state should bear the burden of the entire state employee pension, not pass it on to the town as Governor Moy tried to do. That being said, there are ways to make state employee benefits fair. We're state employees, as I said before. So we get the benefit of having state employee health benefits and pensions. Now, our pensions are different than federal government. People say, okay, Tony, you're serving in the state senate, you're going to retire $180,000 a year pension. Wrong. If I finish this year and it's 20 years in state service, when I haven't even looked into it, but when I turn 62 or 65, my pension's going to be like $8,000 a year. So it's not a ton of money. It's more than I think we should get. We're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. The fact that we've got members of Congress who have a platinum health insurance plan available to them, they opt out and use the state. What does that tell you? So you go to a pharmacy and you pay $1.16 for a prescription or $25 for a prescription. The guy next to you is paying $600 for a prescription, and then you find out later she's breaking her prescriptions in half so she can stretch them out over a longer period of time. And we've got this ridiculous plan. So it's got to change. Those are the fundamental reasons. There are others. We're bonding too much. Our debt service is too high. So 36 cents of every dollar goes to debt service. It doesn't go to arbitrary spending that we can decide. Likewise, a huge amount goes to unfunded pension and health benefit liability for both active state employees and retired state employees, which together is about 90,000 people. It's a lot. What was that? I know that we're doing tolls a little bit separately, but did that kind of cover that? Well, okay, so tolls, all right, let me roll in tolls. All right. I better get into Tony. So let's talk about tolls for a minute. I don't have a philosophical difference on tolls. Initially, it was really border tolls. Border tolls are not permissible. So we don't have to fear about a toll on exit 1 or exit 2, exit 3 in Danbury, and funneling all that traffic back on the George Washington Highway or Eastbury Road and making a disaster of our local roads. That being said, in Connecticut, we don't have an actual firm plan on tolls in Connecticut. They're talking about between 68 and 84, what they call gantries. We will never have those concrete, drop a quarter in the bin or give $1 to the attendant. We're never going to have that again. You're going to drive under some radar things, and if you don't have an easy pass or transponder, you're going to get a picture of your license plate mailed to you, and you're going to have to send them a bill no matter where you live. So we're no longer talking those fixed toll booth situations. Okay, so that's an improvement. But we're talking between 68 and 80-something gantries throughout the state. We're talking 12 between Danbury and Hartford. We're talking 13 between Greenwich and New Haven. We're talking on Merritt Parkway, the Wilbur Cross, Route 8. Route 7 they may be talking about. Where would you put it on Route 7 besides the expressway behind Stu Leonard's? You wouldn't put it in Ridgefield in the 2-lane highway. They're talking Route 2, Route 9, 691. Every road is going to have one. And they're talking about perhaps rolling, again, everything's perhaps rolling out all at once. Massachusetts has tolls on the Massachusetts Turnpike, 16, and the 3 tunnels going into Boston. They don't toll 495, 95, 91, all the other roads. Mass Turnpike is a true turnpike, and now you can go 34 miles without an exit. You don't have a choice. You can't go, okay, I'm going to bypass and go on Route 2 or Route 5 or something, or Route 7, bypass a couple of tolls. You're kind of stuck at Massachusetts Turnpike. Massachusetts Turnpike, their population is nearly double the population of Connecticut. All right, they've got about 6 million people live in Massachusetts. We've got about 3.5 million. Their tolls raised last year $340 million, right? The toll plan for Connecticut is to raise between $600 and $800 million. So we're collecting nearly double the amount of toll money from fewer than half the people who live in Massachusetts. So there's something wrong with that picture. You can argue the DOT commissioner last week said, well, 40% out-of-staters pay the tolls. Our numbers think it's more like 30%, maybe a little bit under, which means 70% of Connecticut residents pay the tolls. It's patently unfair. Now, if we were going to redo the Mixmaster, that bridge, spaghetti mess that's in Waterbury, and we're going to put tolls in there to cover the cost of that, I don't really have a philosophical problem doing that. If we're going to do tolls to redo the viaduct in Hartford with that little tunnel that you go under that's falling apart, I don't really have a problem doing that. If we were going to do a bridge, a toll over the Q Bridge in New Haven to help offset the bonds to pay for that particular bridge, I don't really have a problem with that. I recently drove over the Coronado Bridge in San Diego to Coronado Island. They used to have a toll there. The toll's gone. I got to the island, I'm like, what happened to the toll? Well, they paid off the bond, so the toll went away. When was the last time you heard that happen? Like never. Once it's there forever. So the toll plan has not been well thought out. Now, the Transportation Committee, Toni talked about it further because she's the chairman of it, but they actually passed out a bill pushed by Senator Duff from New Haven that would say, okay, we're going to remove, they passed several bills, but one bill was, we're going to remove the placement of the tolls and how much the tolls are going to cost to like a toll authority. So they're going to remove it from the hands of the legislature. I think it's completely wrong. But I don't like the idea of tolls. I could see certain cases it might be appropriate, but not 80 tolls. The DOT commissioner has said we will have more tolls in Connecticut than any other state in the country, and we're the third smallest state in the country. So what does that tell you? It's not right. So people need to think that through. People understand, okay, there's no more toll booths. It's better. It's not be on the borders. It's better. Yeah, it's better, but it's worse in a whole lot of ways. Think about this: $340 million to Massachusetts, up to $800 million to Connecticut, with less than half the population.
That's a lot to digest, isn't it? So, how did we get to this point? How do we get out of it? And what about tolls? So that's what I understand that you're asking us. You already got a pretty good indication. As Representative Frey just said, we are a citizen legislature, which means it's part-time. And that means that individuals come from all walks of life and professions to serve in the House and the Senate. And as we talked about before, the determination on budgets and bills are the Speaker of the House, who controls the process and the bills that go forward, and negotiates many times the actual benefits, budgets, bills, on everything, as does the President of the Senate. And for a good 40 years or better, there was one party that dominated that. But yet, we didn't have an income tax, right? We didn't. In fact, it wasn't Republicans or Democrats necessarily that passed it, although it did pass by one vote. When Governor Weichert, and he was a member of a Connecticut party, his own party, that really started what I believe is the beginning of a downward spiral for Connecticut. And unfortunately, it has been exacerbated under this new administration because, they've been there 7 or 8 years already. And from what I understand from our good friend Larry Kudlow of Reading, Connecticut, who's an economist, that it takes about 4 years to really hurt an economy, and it takes 4 years to make it better. And I think I felt that here as well, because after the largest tax increase in the state of Connecticut in 2011 and 15, that's when we started to see things go downhill. Because, you can't put your house on the market in 1 year and expect to be out here. To get your affairs in order, it takes about 2 years, 3 years at the most. And that's what we saw. All these tax increases. Straight party line vote, by the way, because, and you didn't say no, we proposed an alternative budget time and again. But the first time really detailed, hundreds of pages long, line item by line item, was the first time that Governor Malloy in 2011 had his historic new budget that had all these, 77 new taxes we didn't have before. And you know what? I know some of them are okay, except that it's usually put in by a state that has no state income tax. These were all added on to the income tax state, in addition, not in replacement of, or take one out and then put another one in. No, this was on top of everything, which made us more expensive and unaffordable. And he wouldn't even look at the alternative budget. We spent a lot of time on it. And in fact, he shut the door. And he made that very public. It's my turn, I'm doing it my way. Well, that way has not worked out so well. Because in 2015, as deficit after deficit after deficit cropped up, he decided to double down in 2015, another historic tax increases. And guess what? This session, even more. $3 for a new tire, 25 cents for every bottle of alcohol or wine that you buy. Many other proposals as well. We even had to fight against a tax on your cell phone service, and we already have a tax on yoga, right? Mileage tax, you name it, tax. There were one tax after another. So that's where we differ oftentimes. Because honestly, about 80% of what we pass is bipartisan. Some of the bills I just talked to you about, it's bipartisan. But the 20% is where we really have a difference of opinion. And in the last year, we actually proposed 10 alternative budget. Some from the House side, some from the Senate, some together on the other side. In fact, one of them was so good, no tax increase at all, so good, and that balanced the budget without the $400 million of pension costs thrown onto the towns like Ridgefield that would have hurt your property taxes and your school budget, that we got bipartisan support that it passed the House and the Senate, both. Yet the governor again vetoed it, and it was not enough to override that veto. Because, again, partisan politics hurts everybody and everything. So we got here because Connecticut really started on the path not only to institute the income tax, but doubled down on many more taxes more recently, and in the process didn't skinny the state as we lost people and jobs, but kept it at a high cost of state employees and those benefits through the ceiling. And in order to meet those benefits and those pensions, right, they underfunded it by historic amounts. We are where Illinois is. And in fact, that slogan, Detroit on the Sound, is now starting to really stick. That reputation that has been, publicized in every newspaper, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Barron's, you name it, even Governing Magazine, which is not a Republican magazine at all, talking about all of the states. Not a good thing, that reputation. And of course, GE leaving hurt even more. And then when he wanted to underfund our local budgets by putting the $400 million worth of cost, which is not the whole cost, the state has been paying since 1970 at the state level onto our towns, that's when the PTA got very involved and paid attention. They're paying attention now to what's going on. So we are not in a good spot. I think that additional taxes is why I have been, as leader now in the Transportation Committee, fighting hard against tolls. As John said, not intrinsically opposed to the concept of tolls. We pay them. I pay them in other states. By the way, on a transponder that I bought from New York, which gives me a discount, just like I was a New York resident. And if Connecticut had tolls, we would have to do that too. So the people that say, oh, border tolls, that won't hurt us, or let's just make it cheaper for us, our citizens won't be at disadvantage as much. Sure. First of all, you can't have border tolls. It's not legal. Secondarily, if we have a discount for our residents, we have to give it to everyone else that buys a Connecticut transponder. That is something that a lot of people don't realize. And we can't exempt Connecticut people and only those. And by the way, truckers are not exempt, by the way. They don't get a free pass. They have the highest diesel tax in Connecticut of any other state, and they have to pay a pass-through tax every year just to pass through. So you catch them. They have to pass through. And by the way, they will divert if you put another toll on top of everything else you're charging them. And if they divert, they're going through Ridgefield, no question. And if the raising of these tolls, they will increase the cost of milk or any other goods they do, because they're not going to reduce their profits margins, because they get whacked, by their shareholders if they do. So why do I oppose tolls for Connecticut when we're surrounded by them? And I will tell you why. Because in Connecticut, we have taxes they don't have. Like, for example, remember I told you the story about the young man who's now living in Boston, who's a telephone operator, and that $1,000 gap, that tax on his car as property? Other states don't have it. Or if they do, it's much like $200 versus $1,200 in Connecticut. Most states with tolls don't have a car property tax. We do. So this would be on top of that. They don't have a gift tax and a heritage tax like Connecticut. We do. This would be on top of it. They don't have a real estate conveyance tax that John's customers have to pay when they're selling their house. And by the way, they want to put one on those buying houses too in Connecticut. They don't have that. They do here in Connecticut. Your tax on pensions, Social Security, they don't have what we have here. And if they have an income tax, which many do, you're allowed to deduct expenses off of it. In Connecticut, you can't. And now it's gone even higher and higher tax brackets. So we're disadvantaged already there. And by the way, they all have a gas tax, especially those without a income tax. They have a higher sales tax, and they have they have a gas tax, by the way, but it's lower than ours. So they have a toll, but they reduce their gas tax. And in Connecticut, not only do we have a really high gas tax, you have two taxes on your gas. Every time you fill up a gallon, you may not feel this, but there's an 8.1 percentage tax on top of it. They don't have those. That's called the gross petroleum sales tax. So when I argue this case, I said, are you willing to take away some of those taxes and then put in tolls? Then maybe you have a good argument, right? But how can you put it on top of all of those? It could cost up to $260 more a month. And if it's congestion pricing, guess who has to pay? Those that are forced to get into work at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock because they're lower management, not upper management, and those are the ones making the least amount of money. So the least amount of wage earners are disadvantaged the most. That's wrong. And quite frankly, what if you're both working, husband and wife? What if you both have to go over toll in separate cars in different places every month? That could be up to $500 more a month. Can you imagine that? Even $60 a week is a lot for certain people. It will break their budget. That's like giving them a pay cut without the employer not even touching their paycheck. So argue with me if you could. Persuade me somehow that you think tolls are a good idea, unless you want to replace a tax that other states do not have, that have tolls. I'm passionate about this because already people are leaving. And by the way, it hurts businesses. I've heard from several that say, we have a fleet, right? If you're a florist, you have to be on the road. If you're delivering pizza, you have to be on the road. If you're delivering laundry, you have to be on the road. And someone else told me about their business. They're really upset about this. That's an anti-business process, unless you reduce their costs in some other way. And yes, it passed barely by 2 votes in transportation. And we're 18 now, and possibly 18 to 17 in the Senate. And I can tell you, there's not a lot of, and there's some Democrats that don't like it either, that are, there. So it's going to be quite, it's not over, folks. And just before I leave you, there is 3 other bills that are even, in my view, worse, that was passed out of committee. One by the governor, by legislative leaders, that would create a transportation authority. Remember I told you I have a bill to put the authority on raising rates for train riders from the DOT to the legislature? This does exactly the opposite. Right now, putting tolls, you have to go through the legislature. These 3 bills would create a transportation authority that says they, at DOT, will make all the decisions on tolls, how many, how much they would raise them, right? All of that would take the fingerprints off of the legislators, off of that decision, and put it at the DOT, so those that want tolls, but they're so afraid of not getting reelected, they don't want to decide. So watch out for those bills. We're fighting that as well.
And your short answer.
Yeah. I agree.
You do.
So how did we get here? You know, there's been very interesting conversations, I would say, throughout the past couple of years, especially the past year as we were dealing with our budget crisis. National conversations where groups were looking at Connecticut and saying, well, how did Connecticut get here? Why is Connecticut in the fiscal disaster that it's in? And, you know, there's been many discussions around that and some varying opinions as to we didn't invest enough in our cities, or suburbs were very attractive several years ago, but they're not attractive anymore, and that's really what Connecticut offers more, so we need to invest more in the cities. There's been varying opinions on all that, and I think they're interesting conversations that I'm always interested in listening to, but I think we can point to one big statistic, which is state spending. So if you look at state spending right before the income tax was implemented in Connecticut in the early 1990s to today, when you adjust for inflation, state spending has increased 87%. Wow. So right there, it kind of says what the issue is we just have a spending issue. You know, that's primarily the issue here. And then you add that to our unfunded liability issue that both Representative Frey and Senator Boucher talked about. Connecticut is currently ranked within the top 5 states that people are leaving. We do not attract businesses to the state in the way that surrounding states have. You know, one statistic that is very enlightening, I think, is, you know, what really, backtrack a sec, what really caused great harm, fiscal harm for Connecticut was the Great Recession. Okay, so that is something that the entire country felt. Every state had to deal with the recession back in 2008, 2009, 2010. But all our surrounding towns here in the Northeast recovered all the jobs that they lost during the recession. Connecticut still has not. We are only about, I think it's 77% of the jobs lost during the recession have been regained here in Connecticut. The only state in the Northeast. You look to Massachusetts, they've recovered over 300%. I think it's around 360% of the jobs that they lost during the recession. So it makes you, it really makes you look back and say, well, why is Connecticut in this situation? And you have to point to the decisions that have been made over the past several years in terms of the largest and then second largest tax increase in state history. The largest in 2011, the second largest in 2015, which has resulted in people leaving, businesses leaving, and it doesn't encourage people to want to come to the state. So we cannot continue to go down that path. The governor's proposed budget that he released about a month ago or so just continued that. It was more of the same. More of the same is why we're in this situation, and it's only going to result in more of the same. And so then a year or two from now, we're going to be sitting here again and saying, well, how do we solve this fiscal crisis here in Connecticut? So, you know, I think we really have to think out of the box, and we have to change our policy approach to these types of issues. I agree a lot with what my colleagues have said, so I won't really repeat what they've said in terms of that, but I would like to touch on the issue of tolls just for just a moment, which is, you know, as I said earlier, tolls are just another expense for the people of our state. And as we've been talking, it's just so many financial issues for Connecticut residents already. Well, studies have shown that 70% of those who would pay tolls would be Connecticut drivers, Connecticut residents. You know, I oftentimes will have people who will come up to me and say, yeah, but what about those out-of-state drivers, right? They don't have to pay a toll, but when I go to their state, I have to pay a toll. So we have to implement tolls so they pay. So on the surface, that might be somewhat logical. You're like, well, I pay it in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts doesn't pay it here. However, if we were to implement it, you'd still pay too. So do we make policy for the 30% of out-of-state residents to pay a toll on top of the 70% of Connecticut residents who will also pay the toll? To me, that doesn't make sense. The other issue is the concern over congestion price tolling. So there's only a certain amount of tolls that we can do in Connecticut in terms of the type of toll that we can have. And congestion price tolling is one that Connecticut could implement, would be able to implement in order to follow federal guidelines. The issue with congestion price tolling is it directly targets working middle class people, because they are the ones who have to be at work at 8:30 in the morning. They are the ones who leave their job at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They're not able to come in to work at 10 o'clock to avoid the toll. They have to be there at a certain time. It also truly impacts my generation, millennials, who oftentimes are in these positions starting out in their careers in order to, in jobs that require them to be there at a certain time. And will heavily be targeted if congestion price tolling is actually enacted. There was a situation in Northern Virginia, I believe it was, where they have congestion price tolling, and there was, for a 10-mile period during peak time, was costing someone $47 to take that ride. And I think that's worthy of a further study and conversation. But something like that, we can't afford that. Connecticut cannot afford that. And so, I would say that is why we were against the toll bills in committee just a couple days ago. The bills that were a part of other toll bills creating an authority, which would basically take the legislature out of this decision, I think is completely detrimental to the process. You elect representatives to go and represent you and to make the tough decisions. You don't elect us to go up and vote for an authority to go and make those tough decisions for you. And because once you have an appointed authority, they can go and do basically whatever they'd like to, because they don't answer to anyone. So I think those are conversations that need to be continue to be had. I think it's very important to really understand the issue of tolls. So it is good to see that we're not talking about border tolls anymore, because we are not allowed to have border tolls. That would be deemed unconstitutional. But with that said, a community like ours is most certainly going to have a toll. We're prime territory for a toll. We're right on the border, the New York border. So although the fear over just having border tolls may not be there, we're definitely going to have a toll in this area if tolls were to be implemented. And we don't even know what that would look like, whether it's 70 tolls throughout the state of Connecticut, how much these tolls would cost. Some studies have shown that estimates could be close to $1,000 a year for families if you're charging about 20 cents a mile, which some studies have done, or more. So I would leave it there in terms of tolls, and happy to discuss further with anyone, but happy to continue.
Can I ask you a really short, quick follow-up on this question? Really short.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, absolutely 30 seconds. So you combine the question about the fiscal crisis and what we're going to do about the financial problems and then the tolls. So the tolls, so first of all, Massachusetts cuts 4 cents per mile. Connecticut is talking between 10 and 20 cents per mile. So, we're going to do it big. But the revenue so we've got two problems. One is the state budget problem, and one is the transportation special fund problem. The toll revenue, so there's going to be a question on the ballot this November on a lockbox. With the Al Gore lockbox thing, which is a good concept. But are you timing me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm almost done. So the way the question is that the toll money would go to the general fund, but then goes to the lockbox. We had made a proposal that it would go straight to the lockbox. So you can be sure that when it gets to the general fund, the dollar that goes there and what ends up in the lockbox are not gonna be the same. And you know what, they're not gonna be more, it's gonna be less because we've got a problem with the state.
Clarify if that's on the question of not.
It's not. The question is on what was approved, and what was approved was that the money that goes to the lockbox is coming from the general fund, not directly from the toll revenue.
Okay, I'm going to ask a real yes or no quick question of all three of you, and then open it up to audience questions.
Good.
Okay. Will you support the Secretary of State's efforts to promote a constitutional amendment to remove restrictive language that prevents Connecticut from establishing options for early voting and no excuse absentee voting? Yes or no?
Well, let's go.
And most likely, yes. It depends. I've introduced bills in the past to do no excuse absentee ballots. My concern is that I don't want to start, 3 months before the election, and rather it be like, the last 2 weeks, because things can change. The last presidential election, things can change close to the election. But and it's paper driven. It adds more burden to the towns and municipalities who handle that. But conceptually, I'm not opposed to that.
Yes, that's two questions. One is no excuse absentee ballot. Yes, I support that. And early voting, no, I don't, because too much happens in an election at the last minute, and it could be explosive, and then what do you do?
It is two questions. So the no absentee, or no excuse absentee, I would say I'm more inclined to support, so yes. Early voting, I would say no. But I would also throw out another idea, which I've talked about a little bit, which is about making Election Day a federal holiday in order to give people the ability to vote in terms of issues with employers and stuff. So.
Okay, thank you. Your turn. And you just stand at the microphone. One question. Whoa, three. How about that?
Check,
Yes.
check one. I'm Gary Jones. I live on the south side. The south side of Ridgefield. I'd like to raise an issue which is nationwide today and possibly worldwide in some particular cases. I just have a couple of minutes that I would like to articulate and get your comments on those.
Are there questions? Do you have a question?
The question is, what is their comment on what I'm going to say? All right.
Let's give it a try.
Okay.
Okay. People kill people, not guns. But one person with one conventional weapon can kill maybe 1 or 2 people. One person with a military weapon can kill many. 2, the Constitution must be strictly interpreted. The framers of the Constitution did not intend a Constitution to be interpreted word for word. They intended an instrument that could be interpreted with later dates, which they didn't have a crystal ball. They didn't know what was like. So this should be loosely interpreted and not strictly interpreted. 3, we have a constitutional right to carry guns off our premises. Myth, another myth. You may have a license to carry a gun. You don't have a right. And you hear people, my constitutional rights. It's very important that this distinction is clear to everybody that you simply just cannot. And this is for the people who are borderline. I know that people have already taken a position one side or the other. That's okay. But I'd like to get your comments on those 3 myths.
Well, what is the question?
What are your comments on those three myths that I just stated?
Well, all right, so it's a little unclear what the questions are, but I'll try to comment what I think is what you're looking for. Yeah, so I agree that if someone wants to protect their home or their family, or they want to, we have a carry provision, or you're a hunter, or you're a sportsman, I have no problem with the Second Amendment rights in that regard. Do we need semi-automatics? I know, I'm told, I've never shot one, I'm told they're fun to shoot. 50 caliber guns, you know, they're used in the Olympics.
Yes.
There's sports things, okay, you know, they make a carve out for that. The bump stops, as I was telling Tammy earlier, John Popper, who's the huge star, but he's the key guy for the Blues Traveler. He's a huge, if you Google him, he's a huge gun. He's almost a fanatic. But he feels that the bump stops are bad. It's like shooting shrapnel into a crowd. So there's no need for that. So yes, I think it's a living. Not everybody agrees with that. They feel the Constitution is the Constitution, and you know that's it, word for word. I kind of feel like maybe, you know, there's some room there. I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment rights. I have to be honest with you, and I hope it happens to none of your families, what my family went through on Sandy Hook. You know, the night before I was at the school concert, the school principal was standing next to me in the hallway. Next morning she was dead. There were all these fourth graders singing, and all their young families were there, and they were taking pictures of the families. And how many of those families are not intact anymore 12 hours later? So when it affects you, so I can relate to the people in Parkland or the ones in Florida or wherever else. When it affects you, I'm sorry, it's just different. And I'm not looking to do away with it. I remember talking so I was part of the negotiation on the gun bill. And Toni and I both, there were other parts of it, but Toni and I voted for the end result. There was mental health and school security and guns. But I remember a week before calling my sister up and said, look, kid, and I'm not going to belabor what she went through, but it was hell. All right, it was just hell, and it still is. We're still living with repercussions from that day in our family, as our other family. But I remember calling her up and said, okay, if I don't vote for that bill, because I wasn't quite, it might have gone just too far, would you still love me? She's like, yep, you know, I trust you, whatever you do is the right thing, you know, I may be not to vote the other cast, but yeah, that's not an issue, you know, and I ended up voting for it. We made a bad bill, the governor wanted to confiscate things, we didn't do that, we made it better. The gun guys are gonna say, you know, no, it's a piece of junk. So not everyone's happy with it, which is probably the sign of a good piece of legislation. The fact of the matter is, since then, we've had a whole lot less, we've even had less suicides because of what we passed. So, you know, I have a special scar on what happened that December 14th. And I can't shake that. And nor I think I should. So, does it cloud my vision? I don't think it does. I think it makes it more real. I do think that the Second Amendment is, you know, there are, you know, the bump stops, you know, or, you know, you're taking a weapon that was deemed illegal, the fully automatic guns, and making these things fully automatic. And here John Popper, who isn't in favor of a lot of things that many of us maybe would be in favor of, but he's against this ban, and he doesn't live in Connecticut anymore, though he used to, but he submitted testimony yesterday. He's like, this is like shooting shrapnel. Your goal is to kill masses. The guy in Las Vegas, he didn't have a scope. He wasn't looking at people. He was just shooting mobs. You know, he injured 400 people. You know, what's the point? We don't need that. It gets into other questions, these 3D printers and the ghost gun bill and, you know, no serial numbers when you can make your own gun. You know, there's like, you know, it's evolving. You know, that's not something that our forefathers thought was going to happen 220 years ago, these 3D printers. So I feel rather strongly about that based on, you know, our family dinners, you know, my son, I'm not getting into this personal stuff, but one of my nieces, her best friend lost her brother, and she was the only remaining child in that family. She dumped, and her and my niece were best friends. She dumped on my niece what she was going through. Not in a bad way. She needed a friend to talk to. But my niece internalized it. What happened? She started eating 200 calories a day. She started cutting herself. We went to all kinds of specialists. We went to a place in Denver. Cost $90,000. We're still paying off. She still has, it's just different. You know, I have my now 5th grade nephew who was in 1st grade, who 5 kids from his kindergarten photo are no longer alive. He was around the corner, so he was saved, and he didn't see anything. They heard things and smelled things, but he didn't see anything. He doesn't smile the same way. When I went to Veterans Park, all right, so I went to K through 12 in Ridgefield. We never worried about school safety. When I heard last week, I had a girl up in high school, Mr. Frey, a Republican family, not activist, right, but they're Republican. I can't wait to graduate high school. She said, I couldn't either. What are you gonna do afterwards? No, it's not that. I don't feel safe here. I don't feel safe. How do you make, we can put all the bulletproof glass in the Veterans Park School. Why was? I'm most familiar with that. How do you protect the playground? How do you protect the Boys and Girls Club? How do you protect the soccer games down below if some crazy person? And let's face it, they tend to be white males under the age of 24, right? We don't have women aren't committing these crimes. Older people aren't committing these, other than the Las Vegas guy. I mean, there's some exceptions, but for the most part, they're white males under the age of 24. So we need a strong mental health component. Yeah, we do things to strengthen school security. There's a lot of things we can do. What we did in Connecticut isn't perfect, but it has made a difference. It's not perfect, but it has made a difference.
Well, you can certainly hear the emotion and the impact that this has had right here next to my dear colleague. It chokes me up because his nieces and nephews always came up to visit me in the Senate when they came to see their beloved uncle. And that's me, and Toni, and I would ride in the car in the Ridgefield Memorial Parade with them every year. It was our tradition. And I cannot tell you how deeply I feel for John going through this, and for those beautiful children that I've watched grow up since they were little. Think about it, it's been almost 10 years. How old were they when they first met? It's just incredible how much emotion. And right now, there's a lot of emotion for young people that are in high schools. And if you do want to participate in an action, this afternoon at 6:30, there will be a march from Westport Library or Bartaco parking lot all the way over to the bridge. And they're going to all go together. And people are invited if you feel compelled that you want to show some kind of support. So I'm hoping to join them if I can, even though I have 2 events going there. So this was a very difficult time and a difficult bill. I have a record, as is John. When I was in the House, any gun bill was negotiated by both sides of the gun issue. Those that did not support guns and those that did. And so most of the bills that we got out were bipartisan. So, the NRA kind of looked at me fairly favorable like anyone else. But ever since the gun bill, I have an F rating, and that's a lot of elections since the gun bill. I think there are 3 or 4 elections. And because I was involved, I didn't want to be involved in crafting a gun bill. It's not my area, as you know. It's transportation, education, or finance and taxes. But they saw me as a leader on the education committee, and had 3 committees: a gun committee, a school security and safety committee, and a mental health committee. And they wanted a Democrat and a Republican on the school, on each of those, for the school security. So they asked me to step up. It wasn't something I really had a lot of interest in wanting to do, but I felt it was my duty if they asked me, and I knew it was going to be a very difficult time. And so I really worked hard on that bill, and it was passed unanimously with no controversy whatsoever. It helped schools to access funds to strengthen their school security, both physically and a process to identify kids in trouble. Because like you, I am troubled by 17-year-old boys. What is going on in their life, in their families, that they reach this point? What goes on in the mind of a young man who not only shot these students and teachers and principals at Sandy Hook, but his own mother? Something terrible is happening there, mental health-wise, and the structure of the family as well. I ran into a candidate for the governor of Alaska, and he and I had a long conversation. He says, well, guns are a part of our culture here. They have gun shows in their elementary schools. They do. They sell them there. He says, but we don't have 12 years old worried about shooting and hurting themselves. There's a certain culture because they hunt for everyday subsistence there. And there's towns in Connecticut that are very much like that as well. But by and large, all the points you made, I agree with you. I voted for the gun bill, and then I voted for the restraining order bill. There was another gun bill that nobody in the gun world really appreciated, except my husband, who's a Second Amendment person. He agreed with it. And like John said, most reasonable, responsible gun owners understand that regulation is critical to safety and protection of other lives. And there is absolutely no reason for bump stop, as you said. And so, of course, we're going to support those kinds of legislation. Now, when you get to the extreme point of let's take guns away completely from everyone, then the whole negotiations breaks down, and you have to be careful what's in that bill, very carefully, because I can't tell Dr. Pettit that he couldn't have saved his family when they were tortured, murdered, and set on fire while they were alive in his home, when he felt, and a woman that's been raped, that could have defended herself because no one could get to her to help her. So there are certain nuances, but absolutely, there's the Second Amendment protection also allows for reasonable regulation, exactly as you pointed out. I hope that makes it very clear to you. And by the way, I got the most votes ever in my whole district after voting for that gun bill. So although I was the only one in the state opposed by a Republican at my convention to try to take me out because of that gun bill. So I've had to weather a lot of criticism and opposition for taking that stand, but I don't shy away from a controversial issue. That's not why you elect me. You elect me to stand up, be seen, be counted, and vote.
Yeah, very sure. I really agree with both what my colleagues really said and the points that you raised. I truly do recognize them. And, one quick thing I would point out is the issue over school safety and security, to have students go to high school or even elementary school and just fear for what their school day is going to have in store for them truly breaks my heart. And I think that really needs to be first and foremost, part of this conversation, and that aligns completely with the mental health piece too. So, thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Susan David, and I live on Holmes Road, which is right here in the center of town, essentially. And I would just like to make the point that I am very concerned what's going on the national level. I am amazed at the corruption, at the fact that honesty means nothing in this country anymore. I realize that 3 of you are Republicans, and I guess I would like you to comment on, do you feel that your party has let you down, given that there are no Republicans essentially in Washington who are willing to go on the record about what's going on, unless they are Republicans who are not seeking re-election. So I would just like to know, do you feel your own party has let you down? And do you see that Washington is in a complete state of chaos?
I recognize the concerns that you raise and the corruption that we see and just kind of the dysfunction. I think that's entirely what sums up, that's the word that sums up Washington, is dysfunction.
I would specifically like you to talk to honesty. There's no honesty anymore. It's really
I think
frightening.
there's complete dysfunction in terms of what's occurring in Washington, D.C. Throughout, and it's not new, at this moment, it's been going on for several years. But I would say that I'm a
You have
kinetic.
to agree it's gotten to an all new level.
It's a very difficult moment, but what I would say is we're all Connecticut Republicans, and we are fighting to save the state of Connecticut, and I am very, very proud to be a Connecticut Republican and to serve with my fellow colleagues here to fight to take Connecticut in a better direction in order to reverse some of the fiscal mistakes of the past and really try to build a brighter future for Connecticut. And so I would say, oftentimes you look throughout the country and there's different spectrums in terms of ideologies regarding different political affiliations, and I would say that a Northeast Republican oftentimes can be a little different than a Republican that you would find in another part of the country. But I would say that I am proud to be a Connecticut Republican who is fighting to bring jobs back to Connecticut, to bring businesses back to Connecticut, to make it more affordable for working middle class people to live in Connecticut.
My focus really is in Connecticut. In Washington, I get the willies when I see tweets and news stories and whatnot. I try not to I really focus my attention to reading the Hartford Courant and the Journal Enquirer and the Connecticut Post, and I do keep in touch with what's going on in Washington, but people who know me, that's just not my style. You know, I went to 5 Republican debates, and there was one candidate who really gave me the willies. The second one was Donald Trump. You know, I could have lived with a whole bunch of other ones in a much more comfortable manner. I think the people in the country wanted, you know, someone to shake things up, and he's certainly doing that, like it or not. I wish that they would get along, they could use Connecticut as a model and get along like we do and compromise. I mean, you know, I'm able to get quite a bit done in Connecticut. It's not, you know, we've been in the minority my whole 20 years I've been up there. But it's reaching out and making sense of what I want to do and working together with the other side of the aisle. They don't do that down there. Dan Malloy was elected. I didn't support Dan Malloy, but I was the first Republican to meet with him, first Republican legislator to meet with him after he was sworn in. And he appreciated that because I wanted him to succeed. Hey, if Donald Trump could pull off some kind of deal with North Korea and make them disarm and all that, more power to him. I'm skeptical, but more power to him. But my focus is really what's going on in Connecticut. What's down there, it makes me squeal, all of us. I mean, it's like, yeesh. Yeah, he might give a good speech one day, and then 2 days later, he totally bought. Look at the turnover in the staff. It just makes me nervous. He's not my kind of guy. I don't have a lot in common with him. But he's our president, want him to succeed, at least during his current term, and we'll see what happens afterwards. Just the same thing I did with Malloy.
Well, I'm sure that those that know me try not to frame me in a certain way, just like I don't like to frame my Democratic friends in a certain way if they have a leader that, you know, people are not happy with. I'm actually on the record as giving a speech to our regional clergy right after Charlottesville. And it did call out our top leadership to speak words that unite and do not divide. And that's how I've tried to frame a lot of controversial issues here in Connecticut. And I would hope and I think that the people in my district look at me as being an honest broker during my time that I'm there. I've been there a long time in the House and Senate, and I think that people have gotten to know who I am and the views that I publish. And in fact, if you should look up, I do have my vision of what a Republican stands for. And I did publish that just recently. So, you know, as I said, it's on my website, and I actually had to speak about this with a Democratic friend, a leader in Westport as well, to a large group not long ago, a couple months ago as well. So I think there's plenty of information there for you. It is disappointing when top leadership on both sides of the political aisle start to speak in a way that brings people down, that insults people, and really they're not acting in a statesman-like way to really move our country forward, because a lot of it is at stake. I'm afraid that we also have a problem in Connecticut where top leadership also is not always speaking in a positive way and framing people in a very negative and divides rather than unites. And look what we have as a result here in our state of Connecticut. A very downward spiral, and not just in policy or budgets, but also in morale. Our most beloved, one of our most beloved governors, by the way, 2 of them were women, Ella Grasso on the Democratic side and Jody Rell on the Republican side. She tells me that when she is down in Florida, people there are optimistic, upbeat. When she comes here, the whole state is depressed. She feels that everyone is depressed, and we don't need that. We need top leadership that unites and brings up the morale of our state or of our country.
Representative Frey, you don't have to leave.
I have about 15 minutes, so I'd love to be able to answer a question. Just
Very good. That should be not the one question.
Well,
Yeah, my name is Guido Cherubino. I live on Wilton Road East in Ridgefield. I have a question. We've been talking a lot about Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts has about twice the population of the state of Connecticut. Yet the state of Connecticut has about the same employees, state employees as Massachusetts, and also our state employees apparently are the highest paid in the country.
Southern California.
$10,000 more a year. So how can we get to a per capita state employee to be even? First of all, how do we get here, and how do we get it back down? So at least you have some chance of saving Connecticut. Then I'll sit for the answer.
Wait a minute, I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna actually, well, you're very well informed, and I'm gonna make it a very quick answer. Remember I said we're part-time? Well, the Speaker of the House, that's where he works, on his other part-time job. And that is for an employee union organization that actually negotiates all those higher wages, healthcare, and pensions. Seems like a conflict of interest to me, but he prevents bills from going forward that would take care of that conflict and say you can't do that. It's not ethical, and it should never happen. Other states do not have that, system. And so as a result of that, our wages are higher. Our pensions are extremely higher, and our health care is unbelievable. No one has them anymore. The pension plan, pension program is defined benefit versus defined contribution other states have.
Things can be done. Indiana cut 20% of their personnel, the state employees. Massachusetts just renegotiated their state trooper benefit. They need to contribute 14% to their retirement. In Connecticut, the average is 4%.
Or zero for a
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? So 14% is negotiated, so there are ways to do that.
I believe it's Rhode Island, went back and sat down. I was looking for you. Like, that wasn't the way I asked the question. I think Rhode Island is the one who came up with the hybrid contribution plan, or one of the states with the defined benefit, defined contribution plan, and I think that's definitely a step in the direction. And I would point back to that statistic I said earlier. Our state spending's increased 87% over the past 25 years or so, and I think you're definitely onto something. That's the direction we need to be headed.
Kind of continuing with that, I spoke to John briefly. Yes, I'm just about to do that, yeah. I am a 30-year resident of Ridgefield. My husband and I are both teachers. My name is Chris Wallace. I retired from Farmingville just recently. My husband just retired from high school. I went to a meeting just last week concerning our health care, which has already been compromised. We're going to pay another $125 per month for our health care starting July 1st. The money in that fund is going to run out the end of September, October, so I'm not sure what's going forward with that. Plus, as you know, and it's been alluded to with state employees, teachers are different, but our fund has also not been fully funded since 2010. My question being, what is the answer? What is in the works? What are the plans to get this back on track?
It's not on that, it's on teachers, the
Pensions and health care.
the local teachers or the state teachers? It's
No,
very important.
No, the local teachers have a state pension.
Yes.
Local teachers have state health care. It's separated out from what they call state employees, but the obligation, the contract that the state has with teachers is that the state pays a third, the teacher pays a third, and currently employed teachers, separating from retired teachers, also pay a third. The state's not putting in their money, that's why we're paying more as the retired teacher. And the pool of teachers, currently employed teachers, is decreasing rapidly, while the pool of retired teachers is increasing exponentially. The money is not there, and yet we paid into this fund. So my question again is, how do we address this problem? How do we fix it? How do we do what needs to be done to satisfy the obligation that the state has?
Well, you couldn't have more clearly defined the mismanagement of state finances as well as you have. And I'm angry about that because I was leading a charge some years ago to make sure that teachers' retirement pension was never touched as a way to put it in the state constitution. We were all together. Well, that we shouldn't do that, right?
But
Yeah.
it's there.
There it is, right. Very bad financial planning, right? And yet, you do contribute, is it 6 to 8%?
Yes,
All right.
7.5%.
7.5% to their pensions when state employees do not. And by the way, you know, some of the benefits are starkly different.
Yes,
And in fact, you have way different, you have.
and we don't get Social Security.
That's right, that's right. So if the state doesn't solve its other management and cost processes better, then it continues to be underfunded. And that is why we need to come back and renegotiate the CVAC contract that is state employees. It's not the teacher's contract, it's the
Right.
state employee contract. That has to be changed dramatically.
And
it isn't-
quickly.
And quickly, because you're absolutely right. You know, it's headed for a very bad place if it's not already there. But you're absolutely right. This highlights just where we are as a state of Connecticut, no question. But I am of the camp that we have to right-size the state employee contract so that it can meet its obligations for our teachers. Because in fact, they've done a much better job than, as you can tell, with the state employee contract.
Well, it is a concern that there will reach a time where our pensions will not be funded. And without Social Security, that leaves us in a real bind.
Well, shouldn't that be a reason to get those state employees back at the table? Rhode Island did that, they brought it back.
But I can't do that, that's why I'm speaking
Well,
to you.
and you know who does that is the governor, okay? They single-handedly negotiate it. We are trying to bring that back by saying you can't use collective bargaining as a process. 46 other states do not use collective bargaining for state-level benefits of this kind. 46 other states do it through the legislative process like you do a budget, so that you can meet those obligations. That speaks to that. And quite frankly, there's a lot to be alarmed at. Did you know that Illinois has reached the point now where they literally may not even give the pensions out? They don't have to pay it, that they're in that kind of.
Well, I don't want us to reach that point, and I
That's right.
appreciate you prioritizing that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Joseph Spino, 71 St. John's Road. Three quick ones. Actually, two quick ones. I'll do an A and a B. Do you support the Democratic Governor Malloy's proposal to basically relieve Hartford of $500 million in debt and put it on the rest of us taxpayers?
Oh, can I tell you? I travel on
That's a yes or
business.
no, Toni.
That is a absolute no, we don't support it. I just want to let you know, I go to Detroit a lot on business, and you know what? They were allowed to go bankrupt, and as a result, all of those benefits we were just talking about were renegotiated, and as a result, they're coming back. So the city of Hartford, and I said this every time, because Waterbury did it too. They went into receivership, they renegotiated. By the way, some cities do three times your salary if you work on Sundays. 3 times that have broken the bank. And that's what Hartford should do. So I'm of the camp that let them go bankrupt, renegotiate, reform, and restructure what's driving them to the point of bankruptcy.
I moved to Ridgefield in 1990. When the state income tax passed, it was a constitutional amendment limiting spending. Per Representative Ferguson, the spending rate has gone up 87% above and beyond the inflation rate, which means it's probably north of about 120, 130%. With that as your track record, why would we ever trust a politician with a lockbox in the state of Connecticut? Thank you. I'll have my corruption questions.
Just a quick question. I have a quick question. John McNicholas, Old Washington Road. I'm a retired civil servant. I'm retired 29 years from New York City. My pension has not increased 1 penny from the day I retired. Okay? Mr. Ferguson mentioned the Rhode Island issue. The Supreme Court ruled that the state of Rhode Island can demand that the unions come to the table and renegotiate every contract. And contracts with state employees are not sacred, and they're bankrupting our state right now. That is the only issue that is ruining our state. Overspending in state salaries and pensions. I do not have health benefits. John, would you recommend to the governor or to the leadership that we demand renegotiating the contract immediately?
They have to. They have to. But wait, John, did you say that the Rhode Island Supreme Court decided, or was the federal Supreme Court?
I believe it's the federal Supreme Court. I believe it is. Or the circuit court.
We'll look into it. It's the only way out.
Right. Right. Because Rhode Island is right ahead of us in the financial crisis.
Gina, the Democratic governor, she was the treasurer controller. she took the lead
Right.
and was very successful.
Now, I'm a civil servant, so I relate to civil servants, but you know what? They're killing us. They're driving me out of the state too.
Absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. But the key here is if it's the state Supreme Court, there are those on there that have been chosen that have a leaning towards labor. Okay, and if they do, then we need an attorney general as well that would be behind us in that effort. If it's the federal Supreme Court, then we have better opportunity to make that happen. And I agree with you 100%.
Can I just say, for a while there, Toni was the last one in line, and Dick, and then other ones joined in. Can we, because I have to leave soon, relatively soon, so can we maybe I'll stay through Toni, and then we want to do offline with the rest of you, unless you haven't asked the question, we go down the back, the very back.
You have contact information in the back from.
In all fairness, I'm happy to stay a little bit, but I've got a 3 o'clock appointment.
Yes.
I gotta get in.
My name is Sarah Kettler. I live in Ridgefield. I just wanted to ask you, I believe that the National Popular Vote Compact law just passed the committee in the House.
You have to speak in the non-commission.
I thought I
Good
was.
question.
Sorry to take up more time. I'll repeat the question. National Popular Vote Compact. It would have states agree that people would vote for the president and their votes would count directly, like they do in every other election. And I would like to know, yes or no, if you will support that.
Well, I've never supported changing national property vote. Now, let me just say, I get that people want to make changes, and if we want to, do away with electoral college or do things differently, that's something that should be addressed on. We want to make it, a national popular vote, and like eliminate the electoral college, or have that discussion. I would encourage Congress to take that up. The national popular vote. And there was a guy named Mort Blackwell who did a very interesting study on this. Connecticut would lose because we have 5 members of Congress, which is based on population.
I'm talking about just generally, we are one country. We have one president. And
Right. But
to
that would
talk
be two
about
systems.
Connecticut losing.
That would be two systems.
The people in Connecticut don't
Excuse me.
vote for the president because
I
they
let
think
you,
their vote
I
won't count.
let you ask your question. Can I finish, please? Okay. So in Connecticut, like many other states, we have 5, we're a small state. So we have 5 representatives based on population. We have 2 bonus senators, irregardless of population. So we've got the same number of senators as California has. We have 7 electoral votes based on our representation in Congress, members of the Senate, members of the House. By diminishing by participating in the national popular vote, we would lose 17% of the value of the Connecticut vote. I'd have a hard time explaining to people in Connecticut that, okay, you voted for X, but our electoral vote college votes are going to vote for Y because they want a national popular vote. If we want to switch everything over to national popular vote, let's have that debate. If we want to have a debate on changing how the electoral vote works, but to leave it to 280 electoral states that represent 280 electoral votes, I think is wrong.
So you won't support the
I would not support it.
legislation now?
No.
I would just add to that. So I actually wrote a paper that's now published in an academic textbook a couple years ago with some colleagues when I was a student at Western Connecticut State University that looked at the National Popular Vote Compact. And I think it's very important to understand, and I think you support it no matter what, but what legislation that's before the General Assembly is not simply just electing the president by the popular vote. It's to have Connecticut join a compact to align themselves with other states which have, supported this compact to hit the 270 votes. So I believe that that is the only legitimate way to actually elect the president by the popular vote is to amend the Constitution. I believe this is a backdoor way of doing that. I also believe that it violates the interstate compact clause within the United States Constitution because it would then need congressional approval, and the National Popular Vote Compact membership or committee, however they operate, has recognized that, and they consider that if you were to get Washington, D.C. to sign on to the compact, then that would imply congressional approval, when in reality, The jurisdiction on the District of Columbia is different, so I don't see that parallel. So I totally understand your point about electing the president by the popular
People
vote.
in Connecticut often don't vote in the presidential election because they feel like their vote doesn't count.
I mean, and
It would
I
be nice for
I truly
everyone to
understand
vote.
that. The issue is that we're voting on a compact that I believe is unconstitutional. So I cannot support that.
No.
Changing to completely elect the president by the popular vote and amending the Constitution, well, that's another whole nother conversation. They're actually quite different, in my opinion, between the compact and the
Having a conversation on changing the way you elect the president, I have no problem. And that's the popular vote, I think it's an end run around and business as purpose.
It's the only option that you were.
Well, it's not.
It's not the only option. It's the only option that we're voting on in the state legislature today. And we may or may not vote on it. I haven't
Can I
figured
just
it
get
out.
a yes or no from Senator Boucher?
You're not going to get a yes or no because you can hear that it's very complex, and I've asked a lot of clarifying questions that even the proponents that have come up to Hartford have not been able to answer fully, and they said that we're going to get back to me with those answers, and they haven't gotten back to me yet, so I cannot answer yes or no.
Hi, I'm Joe Shapiro. I'm at 73 Blackman Road, and I have a question for Representative Frey. I hear what you say, that President Trump isn't really your kind of guy, and his tweets can be problematic. But I want to understand why, in your very big role as one of Connecticut's 2 members of the Republican National Committee, you continue to refrain from criticizing sort of comprehensively, I would say, the tremendous pattern of falsehoods that emanate from President Trump. And I contrast your reluctance. Yes, it is. No, it's only I will start with Representative Frey, but there's a segue to all of that. So I want to contrast that to conservative Republican Senator Jeff Flake, who in his speech on January 17th condemned the president's characterization of the press as, quote, the enemy of the people. And he said something more substantial. So my question is, Senator Flake said that we can no longer turn a blind eye or deaf ear to these assaults on our institutions. So, Representative Frey, you haven't criticized President Trump in any...
Do you have a
Oh,
question?
I do. That's what I'm asking. In any meaningful way. So my question is this: is the prestige of being on the Republican National Committee such that you sort of have to reach a consensus with your other people? Can't you join what Senator Flake said with the full force of his words to criticize President Trump rather than not kind of guy? Some of his tweets are problematic, disagree with what he did in Charlottesville, the sort of more nibbling around the edges kind of stuff. Because here in Ridgefield, President Trump lost by 15 points. He would lose by a lot more if the election were held today. So why don't you join Senator Flake in representing the values of the American people on this issue? And here is Senator Flake's speech, sir. If
Okay.
you want to ever refer.
So I've had, Senator Flake and I have just different personalities. I've never done what he did to President Trump to Governor Malloy. I want Governor Malloy to succeed. I always have in his 7.5 years he was governor, even though we have major differences, just like I assume Senator Flake has with President Trump. Is being on the RNC, I forget how you characterized it, a super duper gig? No, it's not. It costs me $20,000 a year going to these meetings and whatnot. Let me tell you the difference. If I quit, so when a new chairman of the Republican National Committee was chosen, Ron McDonald, I was part of her kitchen cabinet, just help her transition in, right? Really simple. After that, became part of her kitchen cabinet. I had a discussion, it was November 11th, I'll never forget it, Veterans Day, and we had a conference call with a dozen of us on the phone saying we need to withdraw our money from the Senator Moore race in Alabama, because the guy's a dirtbag. There's enough reason to believe that the allegations were real, and we pulled out our money. Then a few weeks later, President Trump jumped back in, and he was speaking on the Florida Panhandle, and he endorsed Moore, and he said that he needed cover, and the RNC came in. We came in with $125,000. It wasn't like we went in with $5 or $6 million. I had a conversation with the chairman of the RNC saying, look, I think the collateral damage may be significant. I hope the guy loses. He's not a guy I can support. He ultimately did lose. After the shooting in Florida, I wrote a letter to the president. It was answered not by the president, by a senior member of staff, saying, look, you have a unique opportunity. You're the president, you got elected with the support of the NRA, which doesn't support me. But if you come out and say, okay, there's areas we can have common agreement, background checks, bump stop bans, whatever. We're not going to change hugely because we're dealing, Connecticut is different than Texas and Oklahoma, right? But there are commonalities that we should be able to agree on. He came back to me and said, not President Trump, but his staff came back to me and said, you raised some good points. We are looking to ban bump stops and fix NICS and fix background checks, do that kind of thing. If I was no longer the RNC, they would tell me to go pound sand. That's absolutely right. The way I operate is never to pack up and go away when I don't win, right? The way I looked at it, President Trump is a third-party candidate who co-opted the Republican Party, and he continues to do so, right? So my job as one of 186 members of the RNC is to build up a coalition on the RNC, the people who are like-minded like me, and I'm doing that.
But I understand, for example, you gave the analogy.
It serves me no purpose.
Our governor isn't undermining democracy, but the president is.
The governor's done a hell of a lot of damage in Connecticut. Trust me. Trust me.
Sir, you asked your question. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the comments on the same issue from the other two.
But the other
No, but the second part of the Republican Party.
You would ask it to John.
So they don't get an opportunity to.
No, they're not our
They are Republican, and that's how you based your question, sir.
I am Neil Lindsay, and we're on the Street Division, and I did something this week that I've never done before.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
And I testified.
Can't hear you.
Park, there you go.
Get close to it.
Okay, here, I'll try to step over.
It's to your account. Well, no, it was.
Okay. So I testified in favor of HB 5417, and it was a very interesting day, left at 10.
This is 5417?
It's the act concerning medical aid and dying.
Okay.
And it's, the bill authorizes the death with dignity for the two doctors to be in accord and with the person having only 6 months or less to live. So, in 2015, Quinnipiac University did a poll. 63% of Connecticut residents supported medical aid in dying. Catholics, 61%. Republicans, 59%. Disabled, 65%. Now, how do we get this out of the committee? And, it was a very interesting event. I must say I was very intrigued and impressed by the hearing. They asked thoughtful questions and many speakers.
Is your question how they get it out of the committee,
Yes,
or whether they support
how
it or
can
not?
you assist, perhaps I should ask, in getting it out of committee? Since it seems to me it's only fair to get it out to the public. Because the majority of the public is in favor of it.
Well, I don't serve in that committee, but their deadline is within the next week, so we'll find out. It's got to come out of their committee, so if you feel in favor of, you're strongly in favor of that, clearly you do by coming up there. I wish I'd seen you up there. Keep in touch with the chairman and the ranking members of that committee. Just send them emails over the weekend to say, look, it's really important. Let's move it out. I don't think that particular bill has to go to another committee. Some have to bounce around. Of the many 4 committees, I don't think that does. If I had to guess, seeing as only 6 weeks left in the session, and we've got some really weighty things, I'm not diminishing that. That's important. But my guess is that bills like that, like legal marijuana, like some certain other bills, probably won't come up before the full House and Senate. But keep it up. There are a lot. I tell the story. When I first got elected, if you're a retired nurse, back then the fee was $70 a year to maintain your nurse's license. And there was a bill that said, okay, if you're a retired nurse and you want to work at blood mobiles and, clinics, that they would reduce the fee to 10%. It took 7 years to get that passed, and who could argue with it? So we're very thoughtful, and sometimes we drag our feet and slow. So just keep it up. Just keep what you're doing. My guess is in a short session. The odds are against it in a short session. Next year it'll be wide open.
Hi, my name is Angela Liptak, and I live on Wilton Road East here in Ridgefield. This question is directed to Senator Boucher, but I'm sure the others may have a comment. Senator Boucher, you recently stated that you favored eliminating Connecticut's income tax. And actually, before I continue, I just want to say thank you to all three for your service. It is not always an easy job. As a result of the recent federal tax law, there is a proposal to cut funding to the Environmental Protection Agency's budget by up to 40%, which means that individual states are picking up more responsibility for protecting our environment. Connecticut's income tax generates in the order of $9 billion in revenues, and according to the state's Office of Fiscal Analysis. If your proposal to eliminate the income tax becomes law, how will Connecticut fund, for example, continuing the protection of the environment, Long Island Sound, clean air, clean water, managing and remediating brownfields, working with other states to help coordinate efforts to reduce air pollution, opposing the transfer of fracking waste through the state, et cetera. I mean, it's a long, long list, and if we had time, we'd just be worried about the agencies in the state of Connecticut would currently do our environmental work and could be affected by a reduction in revenue of $9 billion per year.
Well, as you very well know, I'm very sensitive to environmental issues. It's something I worked on from day one, whether it's preservation, whether it's water quality, whether it's, our emissions laws in the state. In fact, I have in some circles, dubious distinction of being the Republican that voted for the global warming bill in the legislature. And I have been, year after year, supported by the environmental groups in Connecticut because of that. Not to mention preventing a superhighway to go through our area over delicate wetlands, and really working hard to bring investments in our Danbury rail line, not to mention protecting it from total closure to now computer signalizing the system as well. So for me, I'm very, very sensitive, not to mention my daughter went to Duke's Graduate School of the Environment as an environmental scientist. So I hear about this every day. We talk about it every day. We do have to eliminate the income tax if we're going to get competitive again and get jobs back. The way to do that is to change the taxing process to more towards like what we had before the income tax, consumption taxes as well. But we also heard that we must renegotiate the state employee contracts that could save us between $3 and $4 billion, not to mention $1 billion worth of savings as reforming and changing our state agencies themselves. DOT, for example, is 9 times greater in administrative costs per mile than our national average. There's a lot of work to do. It's not just taxing in a different way, but it's also reducing costs.
Can people hear me? This is, I'm Toni Bova, and I live on Danbury Road here in Ridgefield. And first, I wanted to thank John for supporting the ban on bump stocks. Thank you, it's very much appreciated. This question is for Toni. House Bill 5591 would ensure that men and women in Connecticut receive equal pay for equal work. The bill has, I believe, 66 co-sponsors, but you're not one of them.
I am.
Good for you. Great. You're surprising me today. Amazing. Toni, I was wondering why you haven't signed on. Thank you.
Well, interesting and good question, I might add. I am and have been a part of the working group to work on that bill, and I staunchly believe in equal work for equal pay. And I and my legislative aide go to many of those meetings as well, because I have so many committees that I'm actually a chairman of, that I had to move all of those bills through. We're entertaining hundreds of bills in each of those committees. But in the last iteration of that, some of the language in it had changed to go beyond what the original purpose was. So until I see the final language of that, and it's still evolving.
What was the language that you were
there were a number of things that our side of the aisle was concerned about, because it went beyond what was originally intended. Because what we originally intended is that, in fact, if you have a similar job than someone else in that same profession, it should be the same, it should not be based on your gender for sure. But it went beyond that, and that's why, until I see that final language, there are nuances there that went beyond the intent of that, and when it is, then I will fully support it.
Did you ask a question before?
No.
No.
All right, go ahead. Or make it quick.
Oh, I'm the only one.
I gotta get out of here, I wanna take these guys' questions.
Dick Boucher, High Cliff Terrace. Thank you all again for being here. I feel like since there's only one party up here and some of the editorial comments, it would be nice if a fourth seat there, if I could editorialize a little bit, would be for Governor Malloy, who has the lowest approval rating of any governor in the state, in the United States. Yes, I have as many questions as everybody else, so a little editorial comment. How much confidence, tolls, no tolls, anything, do you really have with the Department of Transportation, considering how long they took to build the bridge under River Quad on Route 35? I feel that is a bloated bureaucracy that is almost $1 billion budget.
I know it's with all three of us, but very little confidence in the FD.
Okay, finally, you know, my only comment, the old adage of the only thing in life inevitable are death and taxes. The way medical science is going, I believe there's only one left.
Mark CBS, Soundview Road. Just a real quick question. You talked a great deal about policy changes that are needed, proposed to the tolls. You want to renegotiate contracts with banks, take pensions or some of that these days. But I'd like to know some of the ways you're looking at raising revenue. You want to cut income tax. That's great. I'm no fan of income tax, but before we had income tax in the state, we had the highest taxes and everything else. Gas taxes were the highest. To eliminate that, that's another thing.
It's still the highest.
So,
They're higher than ever before.
no, I agree, but I just would like to know some of the ways you raise revenue if you eliminate things like that.
Well, Governor Moy, well, the last 7 years, Governor Moy has raised taxes, the two largest tax increases in state history. We've been down that road. When I'm not doing legislature, which, by the way, last year was like 12 months a year, I'm doing real estate. So if you think about listing your house, I'll go out to your house. John, who's looking to buy in Ridgefield? When I was a kid in the 60s and 70s in Ridgefield, we were all pilots at IBM. Then it was GE, GTE, American Can, American Paper, Union Carbide. There's none of those today. There's nobody moving in. We had a group of 4 individuals in Greenwich leave Connecticut. Now they already had homes in Florida. Eddie Lampert, Sears Holding. Now Governor Moy says, well, he had 8 employees. They had $18 billion. These 4 people took $300 million a year in income taxes alone. We've been down the road of raising taxes, and it's scaring people out, big time, and from Ridgefield. So the answer, maybe we need to raise taxes, but long before we do that, we got to cut spending. We have to. We have to. We've had the biggest tax increase. We're looking at nickel dime. We're looking at Senate Bill 10 this year was increasing, putting sales tax on over-the-counter medications. Putting sales tax on newspapers. These are all nickel dime stuff. We've got 34 taxes in Connecticut that cost more to collect than we raise, but it's just the bureaucracy. So we have to tackle that stuff first. And the biggest thing is the which we're in agreement, the CBAC agreement. We could save millions there, billions. Can we get rid of the $9 billion in income tax? Personally, I don't think so, but it's so big, we'd have to have like a 30% sales tax. But there are things we can do that you can kind of tell I'm passionate about, plus I have to leave. But there are things that we can do, but raising income, ordinarily, we cut more revenue every year just by the fact that sales tax is a consumer-based and those consumer-priced items go up every year. Gas goes up for the most part, not the last couple of years, but for the most part goes up. Incomes go up. So we collect more revenue year to year than we did the prior year, just by nature. So I don't want to hear another massive tax increases in Connecticut. It's going to chase people out. I just don't.
Right, no, I agree, but I just wondered what other means of revenue you have
It's not a revenue question, it's a spending question.
Right,
We
okay.
do have
And if I
I
could
mean,
just,
revenue may have to play a part of it at some point, and I would be pleased with that. But we have to tackle, it's like the shared, Governor Moore, the shared sacrifice. We haven't had shared sacrifice, it's only people who could pay.
and when you make some of the changes that Representative Frey just mentioned, you'll see more people wanting to live here. You'll see businesses coming here, and you will see revenue actually going up within the state because you'll have more people now contributing. That's a big part of the problem right now.
That's underscored by the fact that Connecticut used to have 6 congressional districts, if not more. But because our population shrank so much, we lost an entire congressional seat. And that means it's an erosion of those taxpayers, like you say. So our base is shrinking. When you increase that base, Tennessee is doing an incredible job. And each time it grows, they've been taking away another tax. Or people knew about Tennessee, I'm afraid we can give our real estate real estate agents a fear, I think, strike fear in there.
Good
Madam,
afternoon.
this will be the last question. Did you get in line just now?
You can be the last question.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make this very, very, very quick in the interest of time. My name's John Devine. I live in Governor Street, and I'm also the vice chair of the town's Economic and Development Commission. Monday, I attended the State Development and Economic Community Development Annual Meeting. And there were some very good presentations. I will save you some time because there were some outside consultants, some business people that developed a plan to help you to fix our budget. Skip the 54 pages of read. I'll give you the summary. The summary is to reduce income tax and eliminate the estate tax. That's a great starting point. It only works if you dramatically increase the sales tax, the gas tax, and put tolls in. And the legislation has to approve every component or the economic model doesn't work. Correct. So it doesn't work. I do think when you talk about increasing revenues, you have to maintain your tax base. And by we all know that our income tax rate is driving people out of town, so our revenues are going down, and our state taxes we don't need. You don't want to work here, and you don't want to die here. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that. The governor did speak to us, and he did make one interesting point. I am. The governor did note that you cannot rely on gas taxes because he pointed out that in 5 years from now, 50% of all automobiles will be hybrids. So you're going to be selling less gas, you'll have less revenue. So the question is, can you reduce the state income tax and hopefully get it down to below 6%? That's the only start. That's the only place we can start with, I hope.
We've got a proposal to do that this year. As far as the electric cars, there are some states that set if you have an electric car, you got to pay $500 to the state in lieu of gas taxes. So there are ways around that without doing this big brotherish mileage tax. It scares people away. But I agree with you. We do have a proposal to lower the income tax rate. The finance committee. I always think this is backwards. You would think the finance committee would tell the appropriations committee what it is that they could spend, and then the finance committee raises it. Well, in Connecticut, it's the reverse. So the finance committee deadline is one day, and then the next day is the appropriations committee. So it just doesn't make sense. That's not the way I run my household, probably the way you run your household. But we do have a proposal to get under 6%.
Is Bob Casella? Did you want to?
I'll speak with you after. I got no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.